I think I was always attracted to girls. Maybe even as far back to when I was in diapers. Those are the first two sentences to my book in chapter 1. Good morning. Hello, Hadassah. My mother would be so proud of me. Mom, talking to Hadassah. What, Ma? Did you give a donation? Mom, my speaking is my donation. Speaking is what? Speaking is not a donation, and why didn't I shave? I'll talk to you later, Mom. My story is a New York City tale about a Jewish boy from Brooklyn who meets a Jewish girl from the Bronx. And it's a true story. Everything is totally true. And I coincidentally happened to be the Jewish boy from Brooklyn, and my wife was the Jewish girl from the Bronx. But my wife wasn't just from any part of the Bronx. People know the Bronx. My wife was from the Grand Concourse. Royalty, the Grand Concourse. Those years, the Grand Concourse was the Park Avenue of the Bronx. Now, I believe there were two categories of Jews who lived in that section of the Bronx back then. And if you ask the first category of Jew where in the Bronx they lived, you would get an answer something like this, See if it sounds familiar. Where I live in the Bronx? I live on the Grand Concourse, right on the Grand Concourse. You know from the Grand Concourse? You know from the Grand Concourse? You see, in Manhattan, Park Avenue goes all the way up through Manhattan. When you get to the Bronx, it's the Grand Concourse. And the Grand Concourse is the Park Avenue. And I have a gorgeous apartment right on the Grand Concourse. That's one category of Jew. The answer. If you ask the second category of Jew who lived in that section of the Bronx, you get a similar answer, almost the same, but a little bit different. It would sound like this. Where I live in the Bronx? I live off the Grand Concourse. And if you ask, where off the Grand Concourse do you live? You get an answer like, what's the difference? What street off the Grand Concourse? I live from my apartment, the Grand Concourse is right there. And from my apartment, I can walk to the Grand Concourse. And if I don't feel like walking, I can take a taxi. By taxi, I'm there in a few minutes. Unless there's traffic. If there's traffic, it could take a little longer, but what's the difference? I'm right off the Grand Concourse. And you know, if you live right on the Grand Concourse, it's very noisy. Oh, it's noisy. Gewalt, the trains, the cars, that was noisy on the Grand Concourse. My apartment's a very quiet apartment. Very quiet. Sometimes it could get noisy. But what's the difference? But most importantly, listen to this. Most important, my apartment is a corner apartment. I have a corner apartment. The station for the corner apartment, it's right in the corner. So I have windows facing this way and windows facing this way and this way. But you know what that means? Cross ventilation. In my apartment, I have cross ventilation. Machaya, the air goes through. Oh my goodness. It's wonderful. And in my apartment, I never need a flocher. The station for a flocher? What's a flocher? Fan. Hadassah, if somebody has to know what a flocher is. I never need a fan in my apartment. The air goes through. And I don't have air conditioning. It's so expensive, air conditioning. I don't have air conditioning. I got cross ventilation. I don't need air conditioning. Sometimes when it gets hot, I could schwitz for a hunt. I could sweat like a dog. But what's the difference? I have cross ventilation. I always thought about being an adult back then. I would have loved being an adult back then. And I would talk with a accent. And if I didn't have a accent, I'd make believe I had a accent to fit in with everybody. And if they asked me where I lived, I would have an answer. Very similar, a little bit different. Where I live off Manhattan. What do you mean you live off Manhattan? You live in Brooklyn. What's the difference? Brooklyn is right off Manhattan. From my apartment, I can be on Delancey Street. On Delancey Street in 10 minutes by taxi. 10 minutes. Unless there's traffic, it could take a little longer. But what's the difference? And I also have a corner apartment. My apartment's okay. And I got cross ventilation. I never need a flucher or anything. But I never, no matter how hot it gets, I never schwitz for no Hund. You know why? Because I have air conditioning. I can afford air conditioning. The beautiful part, I love the people back then. The neighborhoods, I grew up in Brooklyn. My wife grew up in the Bronx. And there are other neighborhoods around the country that's so beautiful. People then, they spoke with emotion, with passion. They were so happy to be here. They were successful. All their children, everyone who had a child was a genius. Well, we know what a definition of a genius is. It's an average kid with a Jewish parent. So it was just a beautiful time. My story, the title of my book is 7 Days of Shiva. My family and I were together for all 7 days of Shiva. And for each night, I told stories about Barbara and me. On the seventh day, when we got up from the Shiva, my daughter said, "Dad, you tell so many stories. My friends came all week to hear you tell stories. And I know you have more because, Dad, there's no end to you. I want you to write a book of stories." So about a month later, I sat down at my desk, ready to write this book of stories. Instead of a book of stories, what came out from me onto the page was my emotions, my experience in the loss. The looking through Shiva eyes is what made it to the page. And in the next several months, I wrote several chapters. And that became the end of the book. I realized that was the end of the book. I put the book down. It was very difficult. I had a lot of funny parts in there, but even the funny parts, the silly parts, because I'm just a silly guy, they were difficult. So I put the book down. I had to figure out my life. After 40 years of marriage, getting to bed by myself was very difficult. I had to find myself. What am I going to do for the future? I had kids. I had grandchildren, a busy career. What do I do? Several years later, I decided I'm giving up the architecture after 40 years, the development projects, the real estate projects, the design projects. This is it. And I'm going to become an author. Just like that. I figured I already started the book. I had the end of the book written already. And then I had ideas for several books after. In fact, my second book should be coming out within the next 12 months. So I decided to become an author, just like that. I sat down and ready to write. And I said, before I write, what is this book about? This book is about the love of my life. And I made a spiritual promise to my wife that I will tell our story to the world, that every day we shared was special. Well, that all sounded good. I made that commitment to my wife. And now I had to start writing something from the beginning of the book. I didn't know when to start. Where do I start? Where do you start? How far back do I go? I'm going to write a book about the love of my life. But what about other girls I didn't have a lot of girls because I met Barbara so young. And as I sat there, two things popped into my mind. And I thought, I think I was always attracted to girls, maybe even as far back as to when I was in diapers. And I wrote that down quickly. And from there, it seemed to come out. And because back then, as a young kid, I remember being confused by girls. I don't know if I was actually attracted to girls or if I was confused by girls. Girls were very confusing to me back then. By the way, being confused by girls is not age restrictive because I'm having more difficult nowadays than I've had when I was a kid. But girls were confused. Every little girl when I was growing up had a doll carriage. And they'd walk around with a doll carriage and they'd have dolls and they'd feed the doll and the doll would pee and they'd change the diaper and they wanted to be mommies. Every girl wanted to be a mommy. And I figured, who wants to be a mommy? My mother has to take care of me. And I was not an easy kid. So I couldn't figure it out. Boys had it much better, I thought. We had baseball, football, basketball. I mean, we loved to play with our balls. And boys, if we were in the middle of playing and we had to pee, I had little elastic pants I wore. I pulled out my pants, pulled out my undershirt, find a bush, a tree, a fence, a wall, something, and I'd pee on it. Little girls had to go back into the house and be private. I didn't understand this whole thing. But there was something about girls that attracted me to them or confused me. I mean, there was something about them. I mean, they were cute, they were soft, they were clean. And boys, seemed to have so much more. I could be tossing around a football, basketball, anything, but when a cute girl wearing a dress with dark brown hair, dark brown eyes, maybe olive complexion, I always stopped what I was doing, and I would stare. I don't know why I was staring or what there was there, but I knew there was something there. I just couldn't figure out what it was, but it was something. I grew up on a block with a shul, an Orthodox shul was right in the center of the block, and all my friends were Jewish. And us Jewish kids back then didn't know a lot about sex, girls, boys, we were just always confused. And one day, we had a new kid that moved on the block. His name was Frankie, the Italian kid. Now, Frankie, the Italian kid, had a lot more information than us Jewish kids. We knew nothing, and he seemed to know everything. And one day, we sat on the sidewalk in a circle, and Frankie told us all about vagina. He described the vagina, every part of the vagina, how it worked, how it functioned, its purpose, what it can do, and everything else. He didn't call it a vagina. He had other colorful words for it. But this is Hadassah. My mother's listening, and I won't go into it. And then, after he finished telling us all about vagina, he told us all about the things that someday we were going to be able to do with our dicks. I tell you, we were sitting there dumbfounded with our jaws dropped. Really? And he told us how our dicks were going to become our best friend. It was just incredible. Looking back to that now, I can't add anything to what Frankie told. He seemed to know everything. I don't know anything more than Frankie told me that day. And I do agree with him, that saying, a man's best friend is his dog. It's just not true. A man's best friend is his dick. And I can tell you that for a fact. A couple of years later, after Frankie told us all this information, it was a school day, and I was in my bed sleeping. Can you hear me? I don't know if I was quite awake yet. And as I'm sleeping, or thinking I'm sleeping, like a sensation just shot through my body. Just kind of, whoo! I woke up. What was that? That was pretty terrific. Did I do something? What was that? It just kind of, whoo! How do I do that again? How could that happen again? And then I remembered everything that Frankie, the Italian kid, had told me. And it was at that very moment that I truly understood, for once and for all, I understood my attraction to girls. My family spent our summers at the Rockaways. If you know, anybody know the Rockaways in Queens, New York? The Rockaways is a beachfront community, had a beautiful boardwalk. The boardwalk went about 100 blocks long. And beautiful beach, the Atlantic Ocean. Along the boardwalk, there were rooming houses, bungalows, and families stayed for the entire summer. And one summer when I was 14, I went to my friend's rooming house to say hello to him. And we were talking. It was 4th of July. There was a lot of festivities going on. People were dressed up. There were a lot of parties going on. And he said, there's a lot of cute girls in my building here. And he introduced me. Barbara was staying. He said, oh, there's one right there. And it was Barbara. I met Barbara for the first time. Barbara was so pretty. She was wearing a flowered sundress. She had dark brown hair, dark brown eyes, an olive complexion, all already a little suntan already. She was so pretty. And she had these dimples. Barbara had these dimples. When she spoke, the dimples went in. When she smiled, the dimples went in. She was so pretty. But I was 14, and I was a teenager already. Barbara was a little younger. She wasn't quite a teenager. There was something about her I liked. There was something about her. I guess I was a confused kid. I could never figure out what it was, but there was something about her. But the rest of the summer, I ignored her the whole summer because I didn't know what there was. Instead, I hung out on Beach 29th Street. If anyone knows where that was, there were bungalows on Beach. You're shaking your head. You're from the area. There were bungalows, and all the kids hung out on Beach 29th Street. I met this girl named Shelley. Shelley was so cute. She had bangs, almost blonde hair, a bob haircut, and she had these puffy cheeks. You just want to squeeze the cheeks. Go like that. You just squeeze the cheeks. We got to talking. We started hanging out on the beach, on the boardwalk, and everything else like that. And one night, we're walking along the boardwalk, and I said, you want to walk along the beach? The beach was dark, the wind, the waves were crackling and everything else like that. She said, yes. We're walking along the beach, and there was one lifeguard stand standing. Normally, there were white painted lifeguard stands with ladders on both sides. On the top, there was a bench for 2 lifeguards to sit. And those were usually pulled back to the boardwalk at the evening, but this is one lifeguard stand was still standing. And Shelley said to me, you want to get up on the lifeguard stand? I go, yeah. I was so dumb, I didn't know what. I said, yeah, we went up on the lifeguard stand. And I'm looking around at the waves, crackling, and everything going on, and how beautiful and everything. And I was like that. I turned to look at Shelley. And Shelley is staring at me, and she's smiling. I looked at her and said, oh my God, what does she want? I may believe she wasn't there. I looked the other way. I didn't know what to do. I tell you, and although I was standing on the lifeguard stand, my body was running up and down the beach. I was sitting on the stand, but I could see my body running up and down the beach. Oh my God, oh my goodness, what does she want? Does she want to kiss? Does she want to make out? Does she want more? Whatever she wants. I don't know what she wants. I could feel her getting closer and closer and closer. I'm having a panic attack now. What do? I jump off the lifeguard stand and get away? How do I run away? Do I just run away? What do I do? What do I do? I was crazed. She was so cute. And I was so horny. I had the will. I just didn't know the way. And I'm reminded of a song from a Broadway show. The feelings that I had at that moment was so similar to the words to this song. And the song goes, pardon me, miss, but I've never done this with a real live girl. What could be harmful in holding an armful of a real live girl? Pardon me if your affectionate squeeze fogs up my goggles and buckles my knees. I'm simply drowned in the sight and the sound and the scent and the feel of a real live girl. Well, I calmed down, got back up on the lifeguard stand, and started to take control. And I thought to myself, listen, I'm 14 years old. I got to kiss this girl. I can feel her getting closer and closer. I got to turn around and kiss this girl. So I turned around and looked. And Shelley now was very close. She brought her lips up to me. Oh my goodness, I'm going to have to kiss this girl. Eventually, our lips touched, and we kissed. We kissed. And after we kissed a little bit, I felt Shelley's jaw moving. She began to go move her jaw. She was moving her jaw. So I figured I'll move my jaw. And the two of us were sitting there moving our jaws. The only problem was I couldn't figure out when I'd get the chance to breathe. I didn't take a breath before I went in with the kiss. And I'm sitting there. I thought I was going to pass out and everything. And then Shelley pulled back. Then she pulled back. Took my deep breath. And then I went in again, and we were kissing. I was a big shot. Oh my God, I was kissing. And all that going. Finally, when we finished, we climbed down. She climbed down from one side. I climbed on the other side. And we began to walk along the beach. As we walked along, but something had changed. We had walked on the boardwalk before. We had walked on the beach. We had done all kinds of walking around. But something had changed. Something had changed. Now, I was holding her hand when we walked. Oh, I'm holding her. I just made out with this girl. Now I'm holding her hand. Oh, my God. I felt what I felt. I was holding Shelley's hand. I kissed her lips. We made out and everything. First time. I'm 14 years old. I'm a teenager. Walking along. I walked up all the way back to her bungalow on Beach 29th Street. I would have kissed her goodnight, but her mother was standing on the front porch. And so I said goodnight, and then I walked on Lucie Road, if people remember Lucie Road, to get back to Beach 31st Street. And as I walked up Lucie Road, I tell you, I was walking on the air. Finally, I'm a teenager. The sky was beautiful. There was no traffic on the road. It was late. And it was beautiful. I was beautiful. And I had a great feeling. And I knew for sure I was in love. I was in love with Shelley. There's nobody else. I was in love with her. I was in love with her. And I couldn't wait to get home, go to sleep, wake up the next morning, see Shelley the next day. I was in love. That lasted about a week. And then we both moved on, which is the usual. That summer went by, and it became winter. And my friend Wayne and I joined the YMWHA, the Young Men's and Women's Hebrew Association, on Linden Boulevard, if anybody knows that. You remember Linden Boulevard? The Y? Okay. And there were dances on Saturday night. You were too young for that? Okay. There were dances on Saturday night, and there was a live band. Usually guys in their 20s was the band. And everybody was in a high school. And I went with Wayne to the dance. People said to me, you shouldn't go to a dance with your best friend, because if you see a girl that you like, and the girl likes your best friend, that could create a problem. Well, there wasn't a problem between Wayne and me, because you see, I was going to the dance to check out the girls. Wayne was going to the dance to check out the guys. So we didn't have a problem. It worked out well. We're standing on the sideline of this dance, and Wayne said to me, Mark, there's a girl over there who's staring at you, and she's talking. He said, don't turn around. Don't turn around. Well, I was always nervous. I never made the first move. Not that I was shy. I just couldn't make the first move. And he said, don't turn around. He says, she's coming over here. I said, is she pretty? He says, oh, she's very pretty. Well, I didn't know whether to trust Wayne or not, because he wasn't interested in girls. But eventually, a girl came up in front of us. And she said, hi, my name is Missy. She was so pretty. Well, I didn't know what to do. I turned around to look at Wayne, and Wayne had disappeared. I don't know where he took off to, but he was gone. He was gone. He was gone. And she said, and she was standing there, and as I'm thinking, wow, it was actually sexually arousing. A Jewish girl named Missy. I had never heard that before. There were a lot of other names. So this was actually sexually arousing. This girl's name was Missy. And I began to think, what would it be missing? Probably short for another name. And in those homes, in those years, Yiddish was spoken a lot. And I figured maybe it was a Yiddish name, and it was shortened to Missy. And I began to think, maybe her real name is like something like Missa Mashina or Missa Mashiga. I'm thinking, Missa Mashina, Missa Mashina. That would make sense that her name now is Missy. And then she says, and what is your name? And for a minute, I forgot what my name was. I said, oh, my name is Mark. And with that, what saved me was the music started playing. A popular song back then. Let's see if you remember it. More than the greatest love the world has known, this is the love I'll give to you alone. And with that, Missy took my hand, and she led me all the way out to the middle of the dance floor. And she put her hands on my shoulders. I put my hands on her. I put my hands on her waist. And we began to dance. More than the simplest words I try to say, I only live to love you more each day. And with that, Missy put her head on my shoulder. I put my head against her head. She put her arms around me. I put my arms around her. And the music started. We kept on dancing. And the music was more than you'll ever know. These arms long to hold you so. My life will be in your keeping. Waking, sleeping, laughing, weeping. And as we danced, I began to feel two things poking me in my chest. I was such a stupid kid. And I thought to myself, what could be poking me in my chest? So I looked down as we were dancing to see what was poking me in my chest. And I saw what was poking me in my chest. And I thought to myself, because I wasn't that dumb, I thought to myself, aren't those things supposed to be soft? And the music continued. Longer than always is a long, long time. And far beyond forever, you'll be mine. I know I've never lived before, and my heart is very sure no one else could love you more. The music stopped. Don't encourage me. I write better than I sing. The music stopped, but I didn't want to stop dancing. I wanted to keep on dancing. I wasn't going to stop dancing. I wanted to keep on dancing with this girl. She had her head on my shoulder, my head against her head, her arms around me, my arms around her, her boobs against my chest, and her name was Missy, which was so arousing. Probably short for Mr. Machina, Mr. Mashega, something like that. I just wanted to keep on dancing. I didn't want to stop. The whole night, I just wanted to keep on. And mark my word, it wasn't because she had her head on my shoulder, my head against her head, her arms around me, my arms around her, her boobs against my chest, and her name was Missy, which was so arousing. Probably short for Mr. Machina, but that wasn't the reason. Anybody guess the reason? You know the reason. What was the reason I didn't want to stop dancing?
She said you have something sticking out.
Oh, right, this is Hadassah. Can we talk like that? Yeah, right. No. Right, but that's a good answer. That's a good answer. I don't remember that, but maybe, yeah, it could be. I didn't want to stop dancing because I was in love. I knew this girl for 12 minutes. 12 minutes, and I was certain that I was in love. I was in love with this girl who had her head on my shoulder, my head against her head, her arms around me, my arms around her, her boobs against her chest. And her name was Missy, which was so arousing. Probably short for Mr. Machina, Mr. Michigan. Eventually, we danced the whole night. At the end of the night, her father came to pick her up a few minutes before the end. And Missy ran to her father, said, Dad, I'll be right out. I want to say goodbye to my friends. And then she came back to me. And we kissed. She turned around. I watched her walk all the way out from the gymnasium, out into the lobby, and I saw her walk through the door. And that was the end. We were over. I never saw her again. Never spoke to her again. That was done. Looked for Wayne, and Wayne and I went home. That summer, it was back into the Rockaways. I was going to visit my friend at that same rooming house that he stayed at a year earlier. And as I'm beginning to walk up the steps to the porch, Barbara started walking down. And I looked at Barbara. I said, oh my goodness, she got hot. I ignored this girl all last summer, and look what happened. She was wearing a halter top, tight jeans, and I was just looking, oh my God, she probably doesn't remember me, and if she does, she probably hates me anyway. What's the difference? As I began walking up, Barbara began walking down the steps. And as she passed me, a big smile. She says, hi. I go, she remembers me. She's not angry at me. I said, hi back. And as we passed, I turned around to look at her from the back. She looked hot from the back, too. That summer, I didn't have the guts to ask her out. I mean, she was so pretty. I just didn't have the courage to ask her out. It wasn't until 2 weeks before the end of the summer, I finally had the courage to ask her out to the movies. And she said yes, almost immediately. She said yes. And we went out. For those last 2 weeks of the summer, we were with each other every single day. At the end of the summer, we kissed goodbye. We traded phone numbers, not knowing what had happened. I got back to Brooklyn. At that time, her family lived in Jackson Heights, Queens. And we spoke every night, and we finally made a date for a Saturday night. I lived in East Flatbush in Brooklyn, which meant I had to take the Utica Avenue bus to Easton Parkway, go down, take the subway at Easton Parkway, take the train all through Brooklyn, up to Grand Central Station in Manhattan. From Grand Central Station, I had to get on the Flushing line. Barbara lived on the last stop in Queens on the Flushing line. After you get off at the stop of the Junction Boulevard, from the Flushing line. She lived about 10 blocks away. As I'm walking up Junction Boulevard to Barbara's apartment, I'm passing a florist. And I go, wow, it'd be nice. I'll bring Barbara a dozen roses. And I went into the florist, and the florist approached me. She said, hi, can I help you? I said, I want a dozen roses. And she asked, and then she told me the price of a dozen roses. Well, that wasn't going to happen. I said, do you have anything cheaper in a bouquet? And the woman, she says, well, let me ask you this question. Is this for a special person? Is this for a girlfriend? And I said, well, she's not my girlfriend yet. And the florist said, well, I could make this single rose look so pretty with greens around it and wrap it. And maybe after tonight, this girl will be your girlfriend. Sounded good. And I took the rose, walked up to Barbara's building, got into her apartment building, walked on the floor. Her mother answered the door. I was standing there with the one rose. Mother had a big smile on her face. I went into the living room. Her dad was there. Her younger brother was there, and her mom. And her mom said, Barbara, Mark is here. And she came out. She gave me a kiss, a little embarrassing in front of her parents and her brother. And she says, is that flower for me? And I go, oh, yes. Yes, I gave her the rose. The florist was right. After that day, Barbara was my girlfriend. The florist is one of the very wonderful people in my life. I write about a lot of people in my book. And we all have wonderful people in our lives, and sometimes we forget about them. The book made me remember all the wonderful people in my life. I don't remember the name of the florist, but I can still picture her face. I'm sure by now she's long gone. All the wonderful people we meet in our life, that they mentor us, they guide us, they help us during difficult times, they're there for good times. And I talk about a lot of those people, and a lot of readers who've read my book said, you reminded me of this one, that one, who they knew in their life. And the florist was one of the many wonderful people in my life who I spoke to. Well, Barbara and I dated. It was a difficult way to date. And we dated kind of off and on because the transit and getting to her was kind of difficult. We went to different high schools. I was going to Samuel J. Tilden High School, and she was going to Newtown High. You went to Samuel J. Tilden. And she was going to Newtown High School. So anyway, we were dating, and we were going almost a year and a half, and I asked Barbara out for New Year's Eve. And I had been working at the Big Apple supermarket on Church Avenue, Brooklyn. I saved a lot of money, and I made reservations at one of the famous steakhouses near Times Square. And I commuted out to Barbara. We took the train in. We were all dressed up, and we sat at this place. There was white tablecloths in the restaurant, and everybody was dressed in tuxedos. And then after, we went out to Times Square. We stood there. And it was so freezing cold. The two of us were hugging, trying to keep warm. There was crowds all around us pushing and shoving and screaming and everything. And we were hugging, trying to keep warm. And Barbara looked into my face. And she said, do you love me? I quickly answered, yes, I love you, but you're ugly. And she said, you're always so silly. Why can't you be serious for once? You're always silly all the time. Be serious for once. If you love me, tell me that you love me. Wow. She was asking me not to be silly. Silly was my middle name when I was a teenager. Because being silly, I spent a lot of time in the assistant principal's office in my school. And it wasn't because I was a bad kid. I was just silly all the time. And now she wants me to be serious. When was I serious? And I stood there. And the night was so beautiful. And the silliness just left me. And the seriousness, which I had never felt before, kind of gave up onto me. And the night, the night, it goes like this. The night is like a lovely tune. Beware, my foolish heart, how white the ever-constant moon. Take care, my foolish heart. There's a line between love and fascination that's so hard to see on an evening such as this. For they give the very same sensation when you're lost in the passion of a kiss. Oh, your lips are much too close to mine. Beware, my foolish heart. But should our eager lips combine, then let the fire start. For this time it isn't fascination or a dream that will fade and fall apart. It's love this time. It's love, my foolish heart. It's love this time. It's love, my foolish heart. And I looked into Barbara's face. She was patiently waiting for my answer, and her dimples were showing. And I looked into her eyes, and I finally answered. I said, yes, I do love you. And as our lips touched, I closed my eyes, and I thought to myself, I really do love this girl. I wasn't saying it because I knew that's what she wanted to hear. I was saying it because I really did know that I love this girl. As I sat at my desk trying to write this so I can bring my feelings, my emotions of that moment onto the page, I thought to myself, was it really love? Was it really love? I mean, we were so young. I was 17, Barbara was 15. What did we know about love? Could it have really been love? Or maybe it was just puppy love. That love, that fascination that teenagers have. So the more I thought about it, if it was just puppy love and it became real love, when did that happen? Because I wanted to write this down in a book. And the more I thought about it, it was always puppy love. Barbara and I never outgrew our puppy love. And puppy love really is not what many people call it. It's a beautiful love. It's a love that's young, innocent, naive, and pure. And it comes to us at a time in our life when we think we're going to live forever. Yes, it was puppy love. For all of our years together, it was our puppy love that made every night feel like the first. So, my story could be summed up in a few sentences. It's a once upon a time. A once upon a time when a boy from Brooklyn meets a girl from the Bronx. They fall in love, get married young, and they live in an apartment in Jackson Heights, Queens. And they call that apartment their honeymoon newlywed apartment. They lived in that apartment for 23 months, and they moved to the far western suburbs of New Jersey, began to raise a family, and they lived happily ever after. Now, once upon a time only comes about once upon a time, which is why it's called Once Upon a Time. But for that boy from Brooklyn and that girl from the Bronx, they had another once upon a time. They became empty nesters, and they sold their home and moved back to the city, to an apartment in Hoboken, New Jersey. And they called that apartment their honeymoon, newlywed apartment. They had come full circle. And they lived happily ever after. Except that happily ever after only lasted for 26 months. I'm often asked if I believe in God. It's a logical question for people to ask me, considering the difficult times we went through. Barbara had 4 cancers over the period of 30 years in our 40-year marriage. It's a reasonable question. And I'm reminded about one of the cancers that she had, the second cancer she had. She was 33 years old. We had 3 children, ages 4, 7, and 9. And she required a double mastectomy. The first night home after the surgery from the hospital, it was very strange in the bedroom that night. For the first time, there was a distance between us. I couldn't figure out what it was all about, but there was a distance between us. Barbara began to undress, and I went downstairs to lock up and make sure everything was closed and everything. When I came back to bed, I saw Barbara in bed. I saw she was wearing pajamas. Covers were up, but I saw she was wearing, and I said, why are you wearing pajamas? Which was a reasonable question because we always slept in the buff. So now for the first time in our marriage, she's wearing pajamas. So when I got into bed, I was wearing undershorts. And Barbara said to me, why are you wearing undershorts? And I said, well, why are you wearing pajamas? And she says, oh, Mark, I can't be walking by the mirror and constantly be reminded of the surgery. So I'm wearing just the top. I'm not wearing the bottoms. So I lifted up the blankets. And look, sure enough, she wasn't wearing the bottoms. And Barbara said to me, how long are you going to stare down there? And I said, oh, I put the blanket down, got out of bed, put on a T-shirt, took off my undershorts, came back into bed. I said, now we match. And Barbara smiled. Barbara smiled with her dimples. I hadn't seen that smile for a long time. But she smiled. And I moved closer. And I moved closer. Closer and closer. Until there was no distance between us anymore. And we kissed. And we kissed. And we made love. After, I saw tears running down the sides of Barbara's cheeks. And I asked, why are you crying? Barbara said, I see that nothing has changed, and you still want me. It pained me so to think that my wife felt so damaged that I wouldn't want her. That night, Barbara and I made peace with the surgery, and our lovemaking after that was fantastic. So to answer the question that people have, do I believe in God? My answer is always the same. Of course I believe in God. I have to. How else can I hope to see my wife again? And sometimes I speak to God nowadays. Just him and me, or her and me. In my talks to God, I usually say, dear God, should you be kind enough to give me a life on this earth after this life? And by the way, I'm not in a hurry on this life. I want to be around for a long, long time. But should you be kind enough to give me a life on this earth after this life? Maybe you can make it a little bit easier on me next time. And by the way, God, I don't need a full life. Baby stage and the growing up stage, I did that already. I don't want to do that again. I don't want to do the growing old stage. I'm doing it now. I don't want to do this again. I just want a few years. I want to be a teenager again. I want to be 17. I want to be 17 years old and standing in Times Square a few minutes before midnight on New Year's Eve and look into Barbara's eyes once again and say, yes, I do love you. Don't let the title of my book mislead you. It may have been 7 days of Shiva, but it was 46 years of puppy love.